Thank you very much. It's lovely to see so many of you here. Do you want to start with the good news or the bad news? The good news, all right, the good news is that the World Economic Forum predicts that gender pay gap is on track to close. Yay! The bad news is it's not for another 169 years. That's true. So if anyone's wondering why we're here today, that's one of the reasons why we're here. If you've come along to debate whether feminism is a good thing or a bad thing, you're probably going to be disappointed tonight. We're not debating the merits of feminism, just as we're not debating the merits of civil rights. What we're going to do, we hope, is to discuss what equality looks like, how it feels, what it makes us re-examine, and what has held it back. Do we need laws to change first? Do we need culture to change laws? Do we need men to back the movement, or is it something that women should be doing by themselves? Does feminism mean promoting women, or does it just mean equality? And we have this fantastic panel who are going to take us through all that. A million brilliant women have given me such strong thoughts for quotes tonight, but the one I eventually landed on was this by Caitlin Moran, which speaks rather to our title. The purpose of feminism isn't to make a particular type of woman. The idea that there are inherently wrong or inherently right types of women is what screwed feminism for so long. This belief that we wouldn't accept slaggy birds, dim birds, birds that bitch, birds that hire cleaners, birds that stay at home with their kids, birds that have pink mini metros with powered by fairy dust bumper stickers, birds in burqas, or birds that like to pretend in their heads they're married to Zach Braff from Scrubs. You know what? Feminism will have all of you, she writes. What is feminism? Simply the belief that women should be as free as men, however nuts, dim, deluded, badly dressed, fat, receding, lazy, and smug they might be. Are you a feminist? That's what she says. Of course you are. If you want to disagree with any of that, feel free to. So here we are. Feminism for Everyone is what we're going with, and this is our pretty stellar lineup here. Catherine Mayers, the president and CEO, co-founder, I should say, of the Women's Equality Party. An Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is her latest book. Jess Phillips, the Labour MP for Birmingham Yardley, author of Every Woman, One Woman's Truth About Speaking the Truth. June Eric-Udorie, activist and author, FGM campaigner, who got feminism added to the A-level politics curriculum. And David Baddiel, fame not the musical fame, My Family not the sitcom fame, actor, comedian, and latterly, can we say, explorer of parental dementia as well. We'll start here, leaving plenty of time for questions from you, and I really want this to be as inclusive as you can, so if there are things that are getting you going, just let me know, and we will get mics to you. It's International Women's Day. We've heard so many statesmen and women, but predominantly statesmen, heralding the advent of International Women's Day, so I'm going to start with a quick fire to each of you. Does it suggest that we have come a long way to recognise International Women's Day, or does it suggest we've got a long way to go? Catherine?
We have an incredibly long way to go. The fact that we have to have International Women's Day is recognition of the fact that the rest of the year is International Men's Day, as somebody sitting next to me once memorably said. The problem that we have is, in fact, that everything is just crammed into this day. So, you know, we all have our books come out around this day, we get licensed to talk about what needs to be done on this day, and the rest of the year, it becomes a side issue. We talk about women's issues as if they weren't things that applied to all of us, as if they were not people issues. So, no, it needs to be something that we can celebrate its abolition, but we can only celebrate its abolition when we get to gender equality, and that's... no, it is going to happen. See, we've already got a disagreement on the panel here. It is going to happen, Jess, and we're going to figure out how. You
publicly confronted an MP who suggested we needed International Men's Day. What is your take on International Women's Day, then?
Well, to me, it's been a bit like Christmas today. I got loads of cards, and it's like I keep going to all these different events, and it's like seeing my family and some you don't get on with so well. And so today has been my best ever International Women's Day, and bearing in mind that, you know, it was the budget today in Westminster, and I didn't notice the budget at all, which it's probably not such a good thing. But what what Catherine is saying is absolutely right. Because it was the budget today, Alison McGovern, who is a colleague of mine, texted me from the chamber. She is an eminent economist. She knows loads and loads about the Treasury inside out, and she was sat in the chamber and she said it's International Women's Day and we're 2.5 hours into the budget debate and not a single woman has spoken yet today. And that was, it certainly the economy was being treated as if it was a man's issue. So there is a definite need to have International Women's Day so that people like Alison can use that platform to say those things. Well, I don't want to see the abolition of International Women's Day ever. I like feminist Christmas. And
Somebody's agreeing with you.
Yeah. A man with his phone.
It was a man's phone.
Are we keeping you? But I don't want to see it abolished. I want more people than just people who go to fancy events in capital cities to be involved with it. I want it to be the day when women go into their boss and ask them what their gender pay gap at work is. I want it to be the day that people actually speak up and that. When I worked in Refuge, it was brilliant because we always knew that we were going to get a government bung on the day of International Women's Day. We'd be like, yes, what money are we going to get today? Because they always have to give us something, and duly they did today. But I want it to be the day where businesses think, oh, fuck, I've got to come up with something to give to women in my workforce. I want everyone to feel that pressure on like you feel like buying soap for your nan at Christmas. I want businesses to feel like they've got to do something for women
But
on
not
that
a bar
day.
of soap.
But not a bar
But
of soap.
every day. But we want them to feel that every day.
June.
About International Women's
Yeah.
Day.
Do you welcome it? Does it herald? Have you been going around saying Happy International Women's Day?
Well, I'll first of all start off by saying I still consider myself a girl, so like, I'm 18. So no. I do think it's important, and I do think over the years it has been for me become a really stressful day because, as Catherine says, it's the one day, and so therefore I must. So this is my 4th event. I, spoken to 300 girls in the morning and then run across the whole of London. Like, it's International Women's Day and we have to make sure everyone hears me speak. And I do think the one thing that kind of worries me about International Women's Day is, again, who are the women that we are paying attention to? And I think that's something that I'd like to see kind of change in the next couple of years. I don't think we should ever have it abolished. I think it's quite nice to have a day when we are celebrating women's equality and like things that we're kind of working towards. But it's, who are we paying attention to? And very, very often, take this panel, the only woman of color here, the only black woman, it's the fact that very often within feminist movements, we're only giving the platforms to certain people, and that's something that I'd like to see changed.
David, how do you approach or broach International Women's Day? I noticed Justin Trudeau posted a video where he started off by saying, Happy International Women's Day. Do you feel that is an obligatory way of opening your sentences today?
No, I haven't done that. Essentially, I'm slightly wondering why I'm here, except to give a sense that this is the polar opposite of a normal BBC comedy panel show. That might be why I'm here. And also, I see myself as a boy. I don't know if you...
Because you're 18.
52. I completely agree that there is a weird thing about International Women's Day, which is that it's totally necessary, and its necessity is because we live in a maladjusted structure. We live in a maladjusted power structure, which seems unapparent to people still. I was reading a book the other day called All Our Wrong Todays, which is a book about someone who comes back from a utopian culture, utopian society, on a different timeline to the one that we are, breaks into our timeline, and one of the main things he's in fact a man, so apologize for mansplaining, but one of the main things he notices is a kind of entrenched misogyny taken for the natural order of things. And I think that's what we still have continually. We still have this kind of incredibly entrenched, all the time, you see it all the time, versions of what gender is, which is entirely power-based. It's entirely based, I think, on creating an idea of woman as lesser, not equal to men. And until that changes, and I don't see it changing, I think you do need International Women's Day. And yeah, I think you're right that when it goes is when that equality happens, but I don't know when that's going to happen.
And Catherine, you took a very proactive step last year, starting the Women's Equality Party, which is a political party which wants what at its heart?
Well, politics has never worked for women. You know, we're coming up to the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote, and we're still in a parliament that has more male MPs now than there have ever been female MPs elected.
It just
And
changed this week. It changed this week.
has it
Flicked
equalised
over
this
because
week?
of the Copeland by-election.
Do you know, this is one of those
There's nothing to be
moments...
proud of, but that is true.
No, but it's one of those moments where you think, damn, because my book's gone to press.
Yeah. Don't worry, I put it in mine as well. And I got the number wrong when I spoke about it in the media, so don't worry.
Well, I will change that slightly according to... But the point is, there's this huge imbalance. I don't think that the mainstream parties work for women either. You need a party that is dedicated to dealing with gender equality, to focusing on gender equality, to building the intersectional space that actually looks at the issues of how different kinds of disadvantage intersect with being female, and does that work and keeps the focus. See, Labour has done fantastic things in the past, and there are great women in Labour now, like Jess, who I would vote for, who I would like to see leading Labour, but they mask the problem of the big parties. And so the reason we started the Women's Equality Party is to keep and maintain that focus. But we also noticed something, which is, if you saw what happened when UKIP started to win votes, what sometimes happened was that rather than challenging UKIP's positions, the mainstream parties contorted themselves to be more like UKIP. So we also got this idea, well, what about if we prove that gender equality is a vote winner? Will they start to contort themselves to be more like us? Strangely enough, yes, it turns out to be the case, and we've seen it now in every election that we've run. We have changed the conversation and pushed gender equality onto the agenda, and I don't know if Jess would accept that we're doing it actually to help Jess and other women MPs, but that
So
is...
you are the UKIP for women?
We are...
They're bombing now.
We have taken the only good bit out of the UKIP playbook, and we are using it for benign ends. That is something quite different, but we're doing a lot more than that. I mean, but that was just part of the inspiration for it.
Jess, then, as a Labour MP, does it matter if Catherine's party takes women voters from Labour to her party? Does that matter in an electoral sense to you, or in an emotional sense?
Yes, of course it matters. I'd be lying if I said that, I'd love to give out my votes to better causes. That's not how politics works. It's about trying to win as many votes as you can. And this was always the argument about the Green Party, that, my dad drummed into me, a vote for the Green Party is a wasted vote because it is just going to get the Tories in, but he said rain got the Tories in. He thought everything, he was very paranoid about the Tories, still is. Of course it matters. So I think that the Women's Equality Party, when looking at where they stand candidates, would have to take that into account, and one would assume they would, because actually you don't want to
Is that party a danger to you?
I don't want to be offensive, but I think in Birmingham Yardley, I'm not sure you get that many votes in Birmingham Yardley.
But the idea of us standing against you
would be silly.
Is silly. I mean, that obviously what we will do is choose our seats strategically. Now, we are standing against Labour right at this moment in time in Liverpool, in the Metro Mayor elections.
And the reason... What's happened in Liverpool is somebody died.
No, but the reason we're standing there is because there were no female candidates. In all the Metro Mayor elections, there were 30 candidates, only 5 of them, including ours, as a woman. And Labour and none of the mainstream parties fielded women in seats that they could win. That tells you where politics is at the moment, and that's why we're doing it. So we have this fantastic candidate called Tabitha Morton for Metro Mayor in Liverpool, vote Liverpool.
So, June, when you hear this, do you think that there is, a strong element that a woman's party, political party, directs what the other parties are doing? Do you think that's how it works now? I mean,
So you think in terms of them being there, they can then kind of push the agenda? Okay. I think the first thing I wanted to say, and I'm not trying to be the confrontational one on this panel, although that was kind of the reputation people were saying behind. When you said, and again, I'm going to keep banging on about intersectionality and why it's important to me think about that. 100 years ago, women got the vote. That isn't necessarily true. 100 years ago, white women got the vote. Yeah. In the US, black women didn't get the vote until after the Civil Rights Act. And you had suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony, and I don't want to misquote her, so I wrote it down and brought it with me. When she says, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will ever work to demand the ballot for the Negro and not the woman." Those are people that have fought for women's rights. And I'm not saying this to be divisive, but I'm saying this because I think it's important that we actually recognize the fact that, like you were saying, there are many intersections, and the ways in which race and class and gender and sexuality intersect is an important conversation to have. To actually answer your question now...
Well, don't you stay with that one, that's absolutely fine. In a broader way, do you think the feminist debate is racist or is uninclusive? How far are you actually going with what you believe here?
Do I think the feminist debate is racist? Do I think there are some feminists that are racist? Absolutely, yes. I will say that. You can all come for me online. I'm ready.
They don't need to. They're all here. It's fine.
But no. But because I do think, within historically, when we look at feminist movements, for instance, when you had the 1913 march with Woodrow Wilson's presidency, the suffrage march, you had Ida B. Wells, who is a journalist, a black female journalist, anti-lynching activist, very, very, very highly regarded, who wanted to march but was told by the white women she couldn't march with them because she was black. That is just the fact. Do I think right now that a lot of the movements we have, that feminism does have problems with race? It absolutely does. I remember looking at Donald Trump's election and thinking, okay, well, he said all these awful things about black women, about Latina people, about Mexicans, but surely him saying, "Oh, I grabbed her by the pussy," I'm sorry if that offends anyone, I really did think that would be the moment that things changed in a really kind of fundamental way, because I understood that while people might not necessarily care about me as a black woman, as a disabled woman, they're more likely to kind of have pity for a white woman. And the fact that the election results came out and 65% of white women voted for Trump and 92% of black women voted for Hillary Clinton, 65% of white women voted for Hillary Clinton, just to make sure that's clear.
Only let black women vote?
I mean, black women
is
are...
the assumption. I'm serious.
But the thing about that is that when you look at the Clinton legacy and you look at the fact that you have a 3 strikes rule, a mass incarceration, and the ways in which Hillary Clinton say we need to bring black people to heal. These are not things I'm making up. These are things that were said 30, 40, 50 years ago. And the fact that they were still able to put aside all of those things and come out to support her. They did not have to support her. Black women do not have to give their votes to Clinton, considering the ways that that presidency affected their lives and affected the lives of black people at that time. But they were still able to put that aside, and yet you had white women putting "I voted" stickers on Susan B. Anthony's grave, who is a racist. You had, all these things that we continuously have where you continuously put marginalized women into the corner, and then after the election, you're all like, "Let's march, yay, women's march." And again, it's important, but it's like, we've been telling you these things. For ages, we've been saying that there is a problem here, and the way that you look at, Latina women and queer women and disabled women, and the way that you continuously sideline us as a problem. And so I'm very, very, very clear that I do not think feminism will actually achieve anything until people sit down and actually listen to marginalized women and how they feel and let them air their grievances before we can have any sort of united front. Because otherwise, we're banging heads, because there are people who are angry and fed up with the way that they have been treated for centuries, and then there are other people saying, well, just kind of put that aside. I can't rip away my blackness and say, okay, you move there, and right now I'm a woman, because I can't mitigate those things. That is central to who I am. And so I think as feminists, we really need to, think about the ways in which we are excluding and work towards including more people, because that way we're actually going to work towards a freedom that is beneficial to all.
let me ask you something on that then. Would a feminist movement or a feminist march have to be led then by a person, a woman of colour, or a black woman or a person of colour, for it to be something that you felt brought everyone behind it?
I don't think it necessarily has to be led by a black woman, but I think, again, with the Women's March, you saw that when it was going to be started out by 3 white women, and there was, again, a huge thing to that, because they were going to originally call it the Million Women's March, but there was a Million Women's March organised by black women, and then again they changed it to the Women's March. But I think it doesn't have to be like, okay, well, now white women all kind of take the back seat, although I have no problem with that. Let's make that clear. But I do think what we do need is to kind of make sure that we are getting as many different voices on board. I'm not saying that middle-class women shouldn't talk, or, you know, rich women don't have a right to talk anymore. I'm saying when you are talking, be aware of your privilege. That is all that is important. Be aware of the privilege that you have, the privilege that I have sitting on this stage. You know, I have privilege even as a black young woman who's disabled. I have privilege over certain women. And I think it's continuously working to acknowledge that and saying, oh, I'm sorry, I fucked up, rather than being like, you know, trying to absolve or create a reason, rather than just accepting, I made a mistake here, I'm going to listen to you now.
And I presume that's something that you, David, are acutely aware of, the position of men or a man in the sort of feminist agenda. What role do you think men have to play in this?
Well, it's complicated because I think what June's talking about in a way is the speaking over of voices that haven't been heard, and the last thing that men need to do in this debate is speak over women, which happens all the time. I mean, all the time. So I think that men have to, you know, let women lead in this debate. However, it's about gender, and gender obviously is both genders, and the way that women are perceived stems from a power dynamic between the two genders, and therefore it's a dance, and often a toxic dance that men are taking part in, and I just think men need to be more aware of what they're doing, and also what it does to the self-image of the male gender to constantly perceive women in the way that they are perceived. I mean, something that I wanted to mention, it's just a bugbear of mine, is that there's this thing this week with Emma Watson wearing a revealing top, and that led to a lot of discussions about what is a feminist and what isn't a feminist. But 2 days before, she'd been on the front cover of the Times because she'd been at a premiere, and not a particularly big premiere, and she was on the front cover of the Times, as there is almost every day an attractive woman, a young woman, white woman, normally, on the front cover of the Times, and she is there to sell the Times. That's why she's there. And I'd say the Times, it's every single newspaper now, and every single media image, and almost every single, at a time when we see proliferating images, proliferating screens, unfortunately, the mainstream media, which is a term I hate because Donald Trump uses it, but the mainstream media is absolutely selling itself now in corporate terms on the back of a particular stereotypical gendered idea of what women are and what women should look like. And that, people talk about the objectification of women in pornography, which obviously goes on, but that tends to mean that people don't notice the enormous objectification of women all the time in everywhere you look, on the television, on the cinema, on women's magazines, in men's magazines, everywhere you look, we are faced with a particular one-dimensional idea of women that is designed to sell you something. And I would say for men, what that does is create an idea, a very narrow, just as that creates a very narrow idea of the female gender, of the male gender. For 7 years, I was patron of something called Calm, which was a charity designed to try and stop young men from killing themselves. Some of you may know this, but the greatest killer of young men, of men under 40 in Britain, is suicide. And that is because young men tend to stick, particularly working class men who haven't been given the advantages perhaps that middle class men have been given, where they're able to find ways of expressing themselves or pay for therapy or whatever. They are not able to express what it is that has led them into depression, but what it is a lot of the time is an idea of what it is to be a man and how they've failed in that regard. And that, I think, really lies on the same spectrum as this objectification of women.
To you two, Catherine or Jess, when you hear June with a very tangible grievance, a movement that you know, she's expressed much better than I have. She wants to be part of, but has been left behind, right? How does that speak to, as it were, that, you know, the feminism that you're pioneering? What has gone on there?
Well, that's precisely why I was talking about the need to create a space that is consciously intersectional and works on those things, and also that creates platforms for...
And do you think that the WEP does that?
The WEP... sorry, I'm
pausing.
No, I know, I'm pausing because we don't call it the WEP, and you just got me to do that. We call it WE, because WE is this lovely inclusive acronym. We work very hard to do that, and I mean, just even from the very beginning, one of the reasons that when Sandy and I got together and decided to give it a go, that we did not think that we would lead this party, and indeed, I'm on a platform now, but most of the time, I'm not the person going out and being on the platform for the party, because the party is not a platform for us. It is to create platforms and this space that is needed to have those discussions, to bring those voices through, and to focus on exactly those sorts of issues. But it doesn't mean that that's an easy thing to do at all, and not least because there is a great deal of very understandable suspicion sometimes on the part of people in different marginalized groups who have traditionally been ridden over and had their voices blotted out.
So, I mean, you know, have this conversation with June then. I mean,
we actually
but
have this conversation a lot.
Would you join that party? Would you vote Labour? Is there a mainstream party that seems to speak to your needs, your ethnicity and your gender?
I might want to be a journalist when I grow up, so I'm afraid I can't give my political... I'm joking.
That's my line.
I'm joking.
They're giving it out all the time, I think, journalists.
Gosh, no, I'm joking. Is there a party that I think speaks to me completely as a person? No.
Right.
Or me. I don't think any party.
No, I don't think.
Speaks to
I don't think
anybody.
I agree. I don't think there is. You know, I think it's again about finding the best choice out of a really bad.
I think I'm probably the only person I know who has a party that speaks to them, and it's because I'm the only person I know besides Sandy Toksvig who started a party.
Right.
You know, and it's a pretty
Nigel
extreme.
Farage, you could hang out with
He
him.
did. Nigel
Kilroy,
Farage.
wasn't it?
No.
So the question is
it's
then-
Alan Sked. It started as a left-wing party, by the way. You know, that's an abstruse bit of knowledge. But no, I mean, it's a pretty extreme thing to have to start your own party. But I did that precisely because there wasn't a party that was speaking to these issues, which is why sometimes we have to, you know.
So the reason I went back to the party question is because I started by asking, do laws need to change? Mm-hmm. Or does culture change which drives laws? How would you approach this in terms of, you know, you see what your goals are, mm-hmm. right? You know what you want to change. How does that happen?
I think both cultures and laws need to exist. I think for me, especially as someone who, I grew up in Nigeria, I spent the kind of first 10 years of my life there, and that was a country where even if in my house we had certain beliefs or people I knew had certain things about women and their place in society, the law didn't always reflect that. And it could be a real barrier knowing that even if the people around you wanted that change to happen, there weren't actually laws in place to enable that to happen. So I think there's a whole thing about culture and that cultures have to change. I think ultimately, even if there are laws and people don't fundamentally accept that, you know, these things are intolerable, misogyny is intolerable, you know, racism is intolerable, et cetera, then it can be really hard to even have a world where people are kind of fighting for these issues. But I also think if you were then to have a world where everyone agreed, but there were no actual laws in place, it would make it really hard to make sure that there was some form of justice.
I mean, you started, Dave, by saying that there was something, I forgot your phrase, but there was something so systemic that people didn't almost recognize that it was the norm. Yeah. So I'm wondering how much of the world you think is driven by women's acceptance of a norm which you don't think should be there. I mean, what are the areas where you think women are too accepting of something that, you know, is blindingly obvious in your eyes, where you have a privilege?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, June is absolutely right. There's a whole series of voices that denote the way that power and privilege is doled out in our society. But I think for myself, and I speak as, as a Jew, so I'm aware that there's all sorts of ways in which race and religion create structures that you can't see immediately, and then you realize that you're being discriminated against or whatever. But I would say the base one is gender. I think the base way in which power exists in our culture and is often not seen as existing is gender. And I would say the way it exists more than anywhere else, and obviously race exists like this as well, but I think it's gender more, is by people thinking, oh, well, that's just the way it is. That there remains, I think...
Give us an example, because that's so interesting to hear. Give me a tangible sense of where that has happened.
Well, I mean, it exists in the way that, I don't know the statistics, like Catherine will know the statistics, but there are still...
Well, it exists in millions of ways. So, for example, it is obvious that a woman is the one who has to take the time off work to have a child. It is just obvious, and people don't want to argue against that because it's as if, we're arguing against maternal love. Yeah. And there's all sorts of things, assumptions that happen to us every single day that are entirely because of our gender.
But if I was going to, actually, now that's absolutely right, but if I was going to put one example from recent times, it is the fact that Donald Trump and not Hillary Clinton is President of the United States, right? Because, I mean, it is... I didn't know that much about what was going on, but I did watch and think, okay, so he is, as far as I can make out, he's a sexual assaulter, he's a man who won't publish his tax returns, he's a bully, he's a narcissist, he seems to be in the pocket of Putin. She's done some emails, right? And as far as I can make out, there was genuinely, but not perceived as such by an enormous amount of American voters, a sense that there was something shrill, all the words that you imagine that people are applying to a woman who might be in power, something not quite right, something uncomfortable, a nasty woman, as Trump put it, about the sheer fact that this was a woman who might be in power.
Just on that, I mean, the research is really interesting because when she was Secretary of State, she was quite popular, but that's because she was in position. The moment that we see a woman seeking power, and I say we because as June points out, white women also voted for Trump, we are socialized to find that in some way asocial, antisocial, bad, not womanly, and penalise women for that. And it is something that came into play with Hillary Clinton.
I want to come right back to that point, but just because there was this applause there, just put up your hand in the audience if you think, lights up if we can, just so we can get a sense. Who thinks here that Donald Trump won the presidency because he was a man? What would you say? What would you say that is? More than half?
Yeah.
More than half. Let me ask it the other way. Who thinks that Hillary Clinton lost the election because she is a woman?
It's the same question.
It is the same question. I'm just, but you know,
it is the same
it's sort of the same question.
Well, I went with it.
Madeleine Albright was the one that said during the election campaign, and actually I think repeated a phrase that she'd used years earlier, there's a special circle of hell for women that don't vote for women. From what you've just said, I mean, do you think that applied? Do you think that was taken seriously, or do you think she sounded jaded, out of touch? How do you read that? Is it important for women to back women for political office?
I think that women not supporting other women are playing into the hands of playing into a self-perpetuating system. I think women should support other women. But it doesn't mean but I'm not saying that you vote for a woman because she is...
I wouldn't vote for
I mean,
Theresa
I
May if you gave me all the tea in China.
I was just going to say
I'd literally rather almost anyone except Donald Trump.
But what you have to do is assume that women coming into politics, women seeking power, are at a disadvantage. So you have to actually examine why you're responding to them in the way that you are.
You wouldn't vote for...
I absolutely disagree with the idea that I have to vote, or that I have to support women because we're women and it's feminism and yay.
Would you vote for a black woman? Would you feel the imperative to...
No,
not
absolutely
at all.
not. She doesn't, just because you're, and again, like I know you said not because she's a woman, but I think often when I look at, often when we talk about feminism, you see this online a lot, you're like, oh, we have to support other women and like And it's important that we do support other women, but I'm also not blind, and I'm not stupid, and I'm going to support you with a brain on. And if
Exactly.
there are,
That's the best phrase. Support people with the brain on.
Well,
But,
I
you
think
know,
it
But
wa-
that,
what
that
Madeleine
means seeing the disadvantage.
Albright was saying was within the party structure, there was a special place. So it was during the primaries, and it was about women in the party supporting a woman over not general voters. Just
It was
saying, just
between
vote for her 'cause
Hillary and
she's a
Bernie,
woman.
wasn't it?
And
Yeah.
I think that whilst I agree, I wouldn't vote for Theresa May. I wouldn't support somebody who was crap, who was a woman, if they were up against a really brilliant man who was going to be good for women.
Yeah.
I would never do that. But I do think that within institutional systems, and it goes back to the argument about whether you need a law or a culture change, I actually think we need structural solutions to structural problems, and that means laws, usually. And I would say, in a party sense, as somebody from a political party that has strange structures, that you have... I still don't understand half of them, those acronyms, they're lost on me. But you have to... I would definitely say, in the Labour Party, I would if two people were similarly good, I
Then
would
I'd vote for
definitely
the-
support the woman.
Yeah, same. I would. If there were
Yeah.
two candidates that on paper were the same and, like, you know, had the same beliefs, that I would. But for me, it's again like, if there's a woman running for something and I don't agree with what she says, or, you know, that's going to harm me, I'm not going to...
Agree, absolutely agree. But what we do
But also
need,
feminism
we need,
gives you that freedom. And I think that's the thing we also need to have, is that feminism should allow women to, you know,
Think
have
of
the
the women who are
freedom
a bit
to-
crap sometimes.
But if the American population voted for Donald Trump, on your understanding, because he's a man,
No, I don't think they don't think they just voted him because he's a man. They voted for him because a third of the American population are stupid. But what I think there was a gendered element to it, and quite a strong gendered element to it, in the sense that, you know, he's like a cartoon of a boorish, you know, American rich white man, and also she fitted into a particularly easily dismissed by a misogynistic culture type of woman, i.e. she was older, you know, she had been traduced by her husband. That came into play. That became like, you know, how can we trust her when she was in a marriage, which is obviously...
it ended up being her fault
It
somewhere along
became
the
her
line,
fault.
didn't it?
But my
Right.
point is that all sorts of gender sort of qualities and gender balances and gender imbalances were brought into play deliberately a lot of the time, and then sometimes unconsciously,
Yeah.
I think.
I think I disagree that Americans voted for Trump because he was a man. I think for me, it was a lot more to do with around race. I really do think that was the key issue there, because if you look at American history, any time we've taken 5 steps forward, we take 100 steps back. And, you know, you have, you know, slavery, Reconstruction. I'm not really going to go into all of this. I also can't it's a long timeline. But I think the point is, you had a black man in the White House. You had a black woman in the White House. You had a black first family. And that really pissed off a lot of Americans. And I think that was simply to do with, a lot of it was around, you know, it was around race.
Yeah.
And obviously gender played into it. But I do think, again, we've kind of seen this creeping, everyone says this creeping fascism. I hate to use these phrases.
June, I'm going to pull us back slightly against all my natural instincts, pull us back from American politics for a little bit and just sort of stick to some of the sort of feminist issues that we were raising. And the one that you brought up, Jess, was childcare and parental rights. Now, I'm wondering if you think the simplest solution, which we're just now starting to sort of inject into, is this absolutely split period of maternity, paternity, you know, parental leave now. Do you think that would be society correcting something major, an economic?
Yes, I think that one of the single biggest things that we could do for women in this country, and it would affect all women, regardless of their class or race or disabilities, is that if we gave men, and people say I hate men, so I'm now about to stick up for them. I think men should be given exactly the same paternity rights as women are given maternity rights, because my husband is just such a better father than I am a mother. I mean, he like knows the kids' shoe sizes and everything.
And is that a conversation you do
Yeah,
have with Jeremy
the sing-
Corbyn? Is that?
Yes, well, we definitely have a conversation about universal childcare, and David Lammy is really, really, really big on the whole fatherhood thing, so we're just starting to sort of try and get it through. But I have requested it of the government twice, and the reason I do it is not just because I do actually love men, not hate them, is because it would stop a woman when she was sat in front of a panel of people being a risk to an employer, because a man would be a risk, and a man would be a risk for the whole of his life, because, as Des O'Connor has taught us,
75.
you can have a baby when you're 100. So only older women wouldn't get discriminated against, and that is fine because they are having it a really rough deal, older women. So let's let them have that for the team. We've taken their pensions.
But also, like, you know, flexible working hours and, like, co-sharing, job sharing. I think all of those things are important in the ways that we actually allow women to raise families and work.
Because the culture, that law change would change the culture. It would stop us thinking that it's a woman's job to raise her children.
It has in the Nordic countries actually made already a big difference, but there is a key point to it, which is that you have to have a use it or lose it portion for men, so that you actually make
So
this
they have to.
They basically, well, they have to take it or they lose it.
money.
And the other point, of course, is that because there's a gender pay gap, you have to invest enough in this scheme that you pay sufficiently for men to be able to take time off work, because you have a gender pay gap, which means that men tend to earn more than women.
So
And therefore they say,
immediately
we can't afford
But
to take time
The
off work.
single reason that most women, I didn't choose to take the time off. My husband has not learnt to lactate, which I think is, poor
Shocking.
on his part.
Poor behaviour.
But it was nothing to do with the fact that I could produce milk. The reason I took time off work when I had my children was because my husband earned more than me, and I didn't care about. It wasn't about it'd be such a child to be away from them. It was because we needed to pay the rent, and I think that families sit down and think, you earn more than me, so it's probably better if you go back to work because, we can't live on my income. And we won't change that until we make... Basically, I want them to suffer. It's like I think equality will be here when there are as many mediocre women in Parliament as there are men in Parliament. And I feel the same way about when men are having to struggle with having to negotiate their terms at work the way that women have to, then I'll be happy.
I've just realised something really curious about this panel, which is that David is literally never going to intervene or enter the conversation until I go up and sort of prod him with my biro. But I do feel that you can, because otherwise I will sort of keep feeling that you're the limb.
That's the only interruption I'm doing.
Just me.
Yeah.
But do you think this is something that men would take? Do you think it's something that they want? And do you think it is the same level of paternity rights, not just a couple of weeks off when the baby's born, but do you think men are yearning to be more involved with their kids and their families and, that whole period of bringing up children?
Well, actually, actually I do. I think, I mean, one of the things, you mentioned I'm doing a show about my family at the moment, and I did a film about my dad, and I don't know if anyone saw that film about my dad, and it was mainly about the fact that he has a particular type of dementia, but it was also, I think, about men and family, and about the fact that I'd grown up with a very, very sort of angry, absent a lot of the time, at work most of the time, dad. And what I've found, and obviously this is just my experience, and it may not be the experience of lots of other men, but is that the generational thing has not carried on that in a kind of cycle of abuse. What I've felt and what I see in most of the men that I know, and again, I'm in a privileged situation, I know that, but is that they've reacted to the coldness and absence and lack of sort of parenting that they've seen from their fathers with really, really wanting to be in touch with their kids as much as possible. And I mean, I do want that. I just do. I know I want to spend as much time as I can with them. And that's an emotional and psychological shift as well as a cultural and political one, but I do think it's really important. I think it will gradually change everything.
Also, if you had 9 months, if I had 9 months off, then my husband had 9 months off, that's 18 months I don't have to pay childcare. That's 18 months that the taxpayer isn't going to have to fund the childcare. It would make much more sense to have that.
Yeah. Completely improves productivity. This is one of the things about this discussion that we're having is that the lack of gender equality is actually an own goal. You know, you want
It's
to...
terrible for the economy.
It's terrible for the economy.
Yeah.
One of the biggest, the easiest, fastest route to growth is to make progress towards gender equality. So why the hell are we not doing it?
And June, I wonder how you come into this. You know, you're 18. Do you look at our generation and think, what on earth have you been doing? Why are you still having this chat? You know.
I mean, I'm lost for words.
Not for long.
Yes, I guess. I guess it's, we haven't moved.
I mean, you know, if we look now, and it's a dangerous thing to do to look at student campus behaviour, but, you know, what we see is the kind of no platforming, the I don't want to be offended, I don't want this, I don't want those speakers, all the rest of it, rather than the sort of, you know, the sort of activism that says, you know, go out and do this and change this. I wonder whether you think feminism, does it feel done to you? Does it feel lame to you? Does it feel...
Absolutely not done. And also not lame. It's the coolest thing. So, like, it is though.
It is the coolest.
It is really cool, and I think it's important. But I think change is incremental, and it takes time. And I think what's important is that we don't stop having these conversations. Actually, I think it can feel really boring to continuously talk about, you know, the need for childcare, the need for, you know, better maternal pay, paternity leave, you know, women on boards, like all of these issues that we're constantly talking about. But I think the minute we stop talking about them, then that's when I'm actually worried as like a young woman growing up in this world.
When I was your age, though, June, those things didn't exist. My son was the first kid to ever get free childcare in this country. He was in the first ever year. So whilst things do change really, really, like, it's like painfully slow, but in my lifetime, it has changed.
But Jess, can I ask you about something which is the left?
Yeah.
Because
I'm not responsible for the left.
I know you're not. I know you're not.
bit,
I'm not
a little bit.
I'm not asking you as a champion. I'm asking you as someone who's living with a party that's perceived as having moved to the left, and certainly sort of, it sort of looks like, you know, you sort of just look at those blokes and you think, right, they are sort of the old white, you know, left, you know, the beards.
What's left of them.
Yeah, exactly. And there does seem, one of the things that seems to mark them out is a sort of fear of women, a fear of letting women have power. Is that right?
I'm not sure whether it's fear. I don't think they think about it, I think is the issue. I don't think, you know, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn are sat in a room going, how can we bring these women down? They're like signing apples. Or,
But don't you think that they also think that they're virtuous in that respect?
They definitely
and
do.
Therefore,
They're
it means
entitled
that
as
they
well.
don't... That
They are
exactly.
virtuous and entitled.
And
I
that's
think
their space.
What's really funny is I've just finished reading Harriet Harman's book, and in the sort of patience, my God, she waited 17 years for things that I'm like after 20 minutes, like, oh my God, am I still asking for this? But she says she didn't know. The thing is, when he became the leader, I just didn't know him very well. And yet he will present to you that he was at the forefront of this women's movement. And if you didn't know Harriet, it seems unlikely.
But it's again that whole thing about, but it's that whole thing about when you said about, you know, mediocre white men, it's that thing that so many men just think that they have a right to things, and you know, you see this all the time around statistics around how, you know, women will wait until they have every single point on the kind of job resume before they apply, whereas men will kind of see, oh, I think 1 and 2, let's have a go, let's have a stab at it. But again, it's that thing that they feel entitled to that, and, you know, think that power is theirs, and it means that they will often, and again, that thing about women putting themselves forward and actually taking up space, that's the thing that I'm always, you know, I'm 18, I'm here, and I'm gonna sit on this stage and be like, I have a right to be here, and not let imposter syndrome be like, oh, June, what do you know? And again, you have to, I think, especially when we live in a world that isn't gender equal, where there are so many barriers, I think it's really important that you know your own worth and you assert that, and don't let, you know, societal barriers kind of come. There are real barriers that will be there that will make it hard for you to have those things, but as much as you can, there are so many things that are going to say no to you, so many people are going to say no to you, and I think it's important, especially as young women, that you're not one of those people saying no to yourselves.
That's really interesting, and I think we're going to open that out in a second. I want to come to questions, but if I just asked you to take up June's last point then, and almost a quick fire, why has it taken so long? What has held women back the most?
Well, there are all these interlocking mechanisms, and some of them are visible and some of them are invisible, and that's part of the problem. David talked about media. We have, at the Women's Equality Party, we have 7 core objectives because all of these things reinforce each other. So equality through and in the media, let's just go back to that one, take that one point. It isn't just the marination in these images, these reductive images of women. It's the absence of women. It's the absence of diversity of women's voices in the media. It's also kind of peculiar things like that fact that came out of research into film, that in any crowd scene you see in the movies, it should be a kind of 50-50 real-world split, and in fact it's only 17% women. Women are absent. Even in cartoons, the female characters speak less than the male characters. In Mulan, which is a film about a female character, the donkey speaks more than she does. You know, it is a world...
My children call it Mullen.
Oh, it probably is Mullen, because they probably watched it. I've just read about it.
But, I mean, that's an incredibly important point, I think. And just to go on about cartoons, you may know this, but in Pixar movies, and Pixar, it's like a brave new world, and I love lots of Pixar movies, but if you take all the images of Pixar heroines on all their movies, and indeed DreamWorks and all the rest of them, and then you put them up on a screen, and then you put them against all the heroes in those, what you'll notice is all the Pixar heroines only look like one woman. They all look like a young woman with a very thin neck, big eyes, very thin waist, and it's like one character for sort of good, virtuous woman is portrayed to kids at a very young age in a cartoon way, so absolutely stamped on their subconscious. The men, they've got lots of different ways. There's lots and lots of different types of men.
We're also told that Frozen is a feminist movie. I mean, Frozen has two sort of button-nosed sylph princesses as the heroines. By the way, the two women together speak a lot less than the man and the... Is it a donkey in that? I've lost track.
It's Olaf, the snowman.
Yeah.
So by gaining your voice, you're essentially losing your femininity. That's the thing that comes through. Is that right?
I didn't understand that.
By the more vocal you are, the less you're deemed to be a perfect woman.
Oh, I see.
But also to follow through on that. Now, why does that happen? If you then look at who's making the movies, if you look at who's making the decisions on which photos to put on the front of newspapers, if you look at how decision-making takes place in the media, it is, I'm afraid, those mediocre white men who are in charge, who are making those decisions.
Yeah. And I think it's power. I think women just haven't had a lot of power. And the little power that they've had to really, really fight for it. And I think that's, the reason why we are still where we are. I think the more power women have, the more power that they have over their own lives and over society and over decisions, the faster we are actually able to make change.
And men don't want to give their power away, because why would you if you had it? Why would you want to give it away? And they don't, people don't recognise
because
that...
actually, from what you've said, maybe they do. Maybe actually there are benefits to be had from seeing the other side.
That's the advocacy job we have to do, among many, but to actually explain where best interest lies. That's the point about gender equality actually being better for most of us.
I mean, I think
but that's like the white women who voted for Trump again. Why on earth did those white women think that their best interest lay in voting for this misogyny?
Because there's a kind of hypnotism,
You'd have to
isn't
ask
there?
them.
There's a kind of hypnotism that the patriarchy has established. That's, that lots of women buy into as much as men. I mean, the fact is...
Exactly. So that's why the advocacy job is a bigger one. If it was just you that we had to convince...
Me personally.
You personally.
I think we
could do it.
Yeah, we'd go home now.
But by the way, I do think we could do it. I think you were all being a bit depressing at the beginning about, is this going to happen? Will we get to a point where we can just celebrate International Women's Day as a historical thing rather than needing it? But a young journalist a couple of days ago started to ask me, will you see gender equality in your lifetime? And then she interrupted herself and she said, actually, no, you're too old.
Great. Let's go to some questions. You can take us in any of the directions we've been and plenty more that you prefer. So yes, there's a hand there. If we can just get a mic down there. There's a purple hand waving here, if we can get a mic there. as it were. And there's one that's actually waving, and I love a wave. That's it. If you've got one more mic just there. Let's start with number one.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I hate to say this, but it's the same debate that I was hearing 20, even 30 years ago. I'm a little bit older than you guys. It's a polarized debate. It seems to me that it's a no-brainer. Gender equality, yes, of course. Why are we still discussing it? Just let's get on and do the work. Something that I think is interesting, that has changed, and millennials have been a big push for this. They're going to make up 75% of the workforce between 2020 and 2025, is the concept of feminine intelligence. Men have it, women have it, it's rising. There are two pieces of interesting research that I think need to feed into a slightly more nuanced debate in this area. One is the research into group intelligence. The more diverse the group, the smarter it is. The more women in the group, the smarter the group. It's got nothing to do with clever men being in the group. It's got everything to do with social intelligence, the capacity for patterning, linking, inclusivity. Second piece of research done immediately after the recession, with all the articles about, would it have been different if there were Lehman sisters instead of Lehman brothers? Yes, it would have. And a piece of research that was global interviewed, there were 65,000 participants in the research. One of the key findings from South Korea right through to the US was that the world would be a better place if men thought more like women.
Okay, brilliant.
And I want to know what you have to say about that.
Great, okay. We'll come back to that one. Let's just get number 2 and number 3. Yes.
Like Catherine, I'm both American and British. And I'm fascinated at how allergic we are in this country to affirmative action. And if you look at how fantastic affirmative action was in North America, especially for civil rights, and I'm interested in the panel's perspective on, is it time for us to be a bit more activist?
Great, thank you very much. Nice and clear. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
In Sydney, film festival, Tropfest, they anonymised their entrances this year. And the female directors went from 5% up to 50%. And I would love to see us force this endless chat where nothing actually happens to anonymising CVs, turn it into an orchestra audition where you come on stage behind a screen and they don't know what race you are or what gender you are. And I think we could force companies and in all sorts of different ways to get women into the room.
Great. That's great. Thank you very much. Let's work backwards then on that one. An anonymous CV, does that get round sexism, or does it just kind of hide underneath it? I mean, does it...
You couldn't have it in lots of jobs because some of them, where I worked, I had to know whether you were a woman or not. So it would be difficult. But the government is about to do it. The government is about to anonymise all CVs because of a piece of research done into Muslim women being discriminated against. So it's about to go through Parliament.
I think it's a really good idea. I think it seems like a really good idea.
But it doesn't confront a problem, right? It just sort of covers it up.
No.
Well, not necessarily.
It helps to get people in. Another question was about affirmative action. What you're actually trying to do is find mechanisms to make change, but in order to anchor that change, you then have to attack the underlying problem, the underlying bias. You have to make unconscious bias. You have to actually make people conscious of that bias and train them out.
Can I just say I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for affirmative action. So the party I am from is totally behind affirmative action and has been since 1992. That they insist that 50% of all of their seats have to have women as the candidates, and it's the only reason that we're anywhere near why we got over that number this week.
Why 50, Jess? Ruth Bader Ginsburg said to us on Newsnight last week.
Go 60.
Well, she said, I'll be happy when all 9 Supreme Court judges are women, because they've had 9 men for the last, years.
I'm totally up for that, but I would also be up for affirmative action in every single government policy that we have. Every single penny in the budget today, I want to know exactly what is being taken from women and what is being spent on women, because all of the spending on roads, on rail, on bloody cables that go in the ground and all this stuff that's meant to make us productive, 1% of those jobs will go to women, and the government shouldn't be allowed to spend that money unless 50% of the taxpayers are being represented.
Jess is absolutely right. Affirmative action is absolutely essential all the way through. Where I would think the only difference is that I am absolutely convinced that we need to have a separate party that holds the feet to the fire, that has this. We've had this in every single aspect of our policy right from the beginning, and we don't lose focus on it because it is the priority.
I want to bring in what you've said with our first speaker's point there. What if we just rethought every structure, every way of dealing with, I don't know, coding or science or reporting on defense, and did it with, I think the phrase you used was group intelligence, men thinking like women? Do you think society would look utterly different? Do you think our workplace would look totally different? Or would we just find the same patterns?
I don't know, because...
Let's get some chimps immediately and do a test.
I mean, that woman presented a whole lot of research. I don't know about the research, but I do think that with any, in any group situation, what you're liable to get are the power structures emerging that people unconsciously adhere to, which is why anonymous CVs are a good idea. Because I think that you will only change things by making people wake up to something they didn't even know they thought.
Yeah.
And the only way you'll do that is by presenting them with the difference.
Right.
So if you suddenly think, oh my God, I've employed a woman, you know, and then you realise, oh, actually, it's not an issue, and that gender isn't an issue. But you have to bring someone to that sometimes. And I think anonymous CVs would be a brilliant idea.
And that's why, you know, affirmative action is, you know, positive discrimination, as they call it, works, because you have power structures in place, and you sometimes have to turn, you know, you have to turn those tables on their head.
But should it swing right to the other side? I mean, when Jess is talking about 50, what if it becomes 80% women?
I don't think women are that great.
That's the quote of the night.
If I'm completely honest with you, I think we still, you know...
Can I just say as well, sorry, for all the people who say we're going to be talking about this in 10 years' time, every single last one of you should be getting up and trying to do something about it, and standing for election, or going to the people who have that power, because I felt like that, and I've changed like 9 laws. So...
I'm listening. There's so many hands up. I don't want to miss anyone. Where's number 3? Oh, you've got number 4. Yes, just find me somebody right where you are. Perfect. And where's number... and let's get this lady on with a very straight hand there. Yeah. Where's number 1? Let's start with you.
Hi. I have a lot of friends who agree with the things that we're talking about feminism is important, and they understand that things need to be done, and a lot of people get on board and do certain things towards that end. And then I have a lot of friends who work in what I would say corporate environments, including my brother who works at a, you know, corporate lawyer dealing with banks and bankers, and they're incredibly busy and they have very little time, and they don't have a huge amount of representation at the very top level of women. And his firm definitely try, but the women fall away before they get to the top because they cannot put the hours in. They just don't want it. They don't want that pressure. They don't want that time, even with the money. And part of it, I say, why can't you change the whole structure at the top, and just because they want to, and he says because the other side, we're client-facing, and the banks who we deal with, they're all men, and they're all putting the hours in. They don't see their kids. They don't go home, but they want to make money. They want to be power brokers. These are the people who have power and money. They have the ear of the government. And I just wonder, it's okay to talk to people who, everybody probably in this room is on side with what we're talking about. How do you talk to the people who are too busy to be here? Right. Who just don't have the time for feminism?
Great, thank you. And the changing, the disrupting the structure. We'll come back to that. Yeah.
So I'm a big feminist, obvs. And one of the things I always do is I always try and advocate for feminism when I'm talking to men and when I talk to women. And it's a pretty easy sell to my female friends. But for my male friends, a lot of them, yeah, they'll agree with me and they'll go, ooh, I am a feminist, am I? And you know, I'll get a lot of them to agree eventually. But the frustrating thing is that there's actually no major male role models who sell a positive vision of what gender equality will mean for them. And I think there's only so much as women we can do to convince them. I think things are sometimes more convincing when it's your own gender making that argument.
Right. Okay, great. So major male role models. Number 3, yeah.
Is this working?
Yep.
There we go. My name is Alison, and I actually co-chair the Democrats Abroad UK Women's Caucus. So if you're American, you should join us.
Do you know what? Let's just cut to the question. We're not doing platforming right here.
Sorry. But what I've noticed tonight is actually a lot of talk around culture and cultural issues, capitalism, these kinds of things that are actually inherently patriarchal and actually make a lot of decisions about our lives and our futures. And it's not necessarily a question so much as a comment, which is, what are we doing to self-educate around these kinds of things? Is it enough to buy Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, and think that this is somehow going to guide us to a better, more gender equal life? Or are you going to read her book and then tear it to shreds with your girlfriends over coffee?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Number 4, last one, and then we'll tackle all of them.
Hi, yeah, I'm very lucky to have come from a very feminist family. Emily, you know my sister Zanny and my parents, you know them well, yeah. But my question is, as a young woman who, I'm an accountant, I work for a Big 4 firm, gender equality, there's not a big gender pay gap with us, but there is an inherent issue of men still think they are better than us. On a practical level, what do we do to improve this situation? It's all well and good having big debates about it, but what can we do every day to improve this situation?
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. I only know you as Bundle. I'm going to take all of those in the round because I think a lot of those are the sort of the how-to guide. That's what we're hearing. If you have a structure that doesn't want to, as it were, you know, miss out on the bottom line, how do you get the women in at the top, or do you change the structure completely? If you've got male friends that think they're on board but don't really know what else to do, how do you get them into it? If you're looking to self-educate, if you're looking to close the gender pay gap, what are the things practically that we should be doing? You can go to in any order, because I think they all speak to the same thing, which is solutions.
Well, I think that we have to, the culture won't change. Cultures will not change by themselves. And we've tried just waiting, 196 years, 76 years, just waiting. I think that there has to be intervention, and at the moment there won't be intervention. We have a non-interventionist government in both America and in the UK.
We had today, as many here will know, the day of, I can't remember what it was called, the no action, a day without women, right? So women were taking back their time or their services or their care, and it was a day of action, industrial action on behalf of women. Is that what needs to happen?
Well,
I mean, all the big civil rights movements have had, have had major clashes to actually achieve things. As it happens,
we're trying to actually organise something on a much bigger scale than that for next year. Because in Iceland in 1975, 90% of women took the day off. It wasn't billed as a strike. They did it in conjunction, actually, with employers and with trade unions and the widest possible buy-in from all different partnerships in order to get 90% of women out for the day. And that had this extraordinarily galvanizing effect. And this actually answers another question, because the effect was not just on the women who took part, who were politicized and energized by that process, but the men in Iceland, who suddenly saw all the things that women had been doing, had been contributing, that they had not been aware of. And it did not change those power structures overnight, but it changed the attitude towards making progress towards gender equality.
And they've got gender equality now?
Iceland has now ranked for 7 years as the most gender equal country in the world, but of course the shocking thing is they are nowhere near gender equality. They are just the most, they have made a lot of progress.
Let me ask the
that
audience
is why we need a day off, and that's why we need these sorts of actions combined with day-to-day gritty politics. Laws make a huge
Catherine,
difference.
let me just ask, who here, if the same thing were organised here, who here would feel comfortable and keen to have a day off? You're not getting paid for this. And you're taking.
You're not allowed to look after your children.
You're not allowed to look after your children. You're not
your
allowed
elderly
to work,
relatives.
or your elderly relative. All that goes. I'm not very good at telling how many. Who wouldn't? Who would feel uncomfortable? You are allowed to put your hand up here. Yeah, I mean it's really interesting to sort of get a sense of of how that works.
I do think, Emily, some people put their hand up just at the idea of a day off.
Yeah.
A day off looking after your own children.
And
you're not allowed to look after your children
There
either.
I was about to say that David was your answer to the question about who was going to be the role model advocating for women, the male role model. You've just blotted your copybook.
But I think this gets to something really big, which is a lot of movements have seen, they have seen blood and violence to get change. And
So is the women's movement, suffragettes.
Exactly, and that's my point, that the women's movement was not listened to until, she ran under a horse in front of the king and photographers.
Yeah.
So has the fact that it has been nicely fought worked against it?
But I think one of the benefits about kind of Brexit and the election is the fact that people can't, you can't sit down and then say, well, this isn't a problem, because it's glaring. And I think that's, one of the benefits that we do have is now we do see a lot more activism. The Women's March, that was it, even though I didn't march, because I don't march, because I don't like going outside. Sorry, going back to the point that, one of the benefits about that was that you had that huge, kind of, was it like 2 million women around the world or something? Absolutely. Coming out and showing solidarity, and actually a lot of women kind of being, as they say, woke.
It was more. It was 100 million, wasn't it? I think it was like 1 million in Washington.
Yeah, there were loads of women,
millions.
but that's the thing, is that I do think, if anything, is now that we kind of have, galvanizing and working and going out and being active is so important. And I think the person who asked the question about being a young woman and no one taking you seriously is, I'm 18 and I work in corporate publishing. And I go in day to day and I'm the youngest person in the office, and even though I work in a very, very female dominated environment because I'm in publishing, a lot of the time I do feel that, like, do people not take me seriously? Am I too young? Do they just think I'm some random black girl running around the office? But I think the thing that I'd always say is that as much as there are, power structures that need to change, laws that need to change, attitudes that need to change, I think one of the biggest things that you can do as a person is to really, really take up the space that you can, go to those meetings. One of the things I've done is, I'm in a junior position, but I will talk to people who are high up on the board. I do not care. Like, that doesn't exist within, and I see that around the office. They're like, oh.
So you don't accept hierarchy?
Oh no, I absolutely do not accept.
You should definitely come and work where I work.
I do, but it's.
I don't respect it either.
But it really irks people. It really does make people angry, because I can see them, oh yes, I have a meeting with the MD and I scheduled it without clearing it with my manager. I know, yes, that is a thing, maybe I should have cleared it with him. But again, it's that thing where you have to know that if there are things you want to talk about and things you want to raise, I can't, talking to middle manager, okay, we've had a conversation and I leave and you leave. What are you going to do? So I don't know if you're going to take that issue to the top. And I think sometimes as women, we have to be quite bold and take those big steps and say, go straight to the top. Raise those issues about the gender gap, but raise them and talk about it. There's people who can actually bring about that change.
I mean, you said just, didn't you? Nobody's ever going to relinquish power, so women have to seize it. You basically have to be in this. Okay, let's get some more questions in. We've got 10 more minutes. Yes, first hand there. Oh, I can't keep looking at the front. Red top there, please. Man there.
Man.
Yes. And you've got a mic. I'm just going to trust you, number 3. Choose somebody great. Right, where did we start? Yes.
So I'm
Try and just keep them as brief as you can. I know you haven't even started, but I'm just saying that.
I'm 19 and I'm disabled and I'm LGBT, and I think you've got to, talking about intersectionality is so important, but also just asking who'd be willing to do the day off. Okay, I might have disadvantages in other places, but I'm a student, I don't have kids to look after. So I think not just intersectionality, but inclusivity. And kind of my question is, how do you, we need to bear in mind the fact that other people have different, I'm a feminist and it's very important to me, but if I'm going to have more of an issue if something affects me and my disability, that's got to come first. And I think kind of take into consideration that there are so many different things that affect it, and making intersectionality more of something that, and inclusivity something that more people are more aware of, because I'm white and and I can get and get away with not looking like I've got a disability because it's a hidden disability, and sexuality is not an obvious thing, but you know, it's something that we've got to look further into. And I just kind of wanted to ask, how can we make that something that people are more conscious of, just generally, you know, not just in Parliament, but day to day and in the workplace and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's come back to that one. Number, I'm going to say red jumper. Yeah, red dress, thank you.
I'm 19 too, and I basically wanted to ask the same question, which was, I come from an incredibly privileged background, but how do I pass the mic? And June, I wanted to ask you that. Like, how do I go about that?
Great. She'll tell you. Who did we have next? You, sir, I think. Yes. Have you got the mic there? It's just coming up to you now. This gentleman here with his hand, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, I work in an all-boys school, and we have an active feminist society, which I'm very proud of. And they're here this evening, not organised by me. They organised it for us. I think they struggle sometimes with being male feminists, and they provoke a reaction. My question is it difficult to be a male feminist?
Do you want to ask the man, presumably on the panel, do you? Or we'll work that one out. And number 3, yeah.
I wanted to ask Jess about, and Catherine, I guess, about Parliament specifically and access for women in Parliament. And something stuck out for me that happened probably a year ago with one of your colleagues, Tulip Sadiq, who heavily pregnant in the chamber, left to eat some food and was really heavily castigated when she came back. And I think the words that they used towards her were, you're breaking parliamentary protocol and you're bringing down womankind by doing it, by suggesting that pregnant women can't sit for 3 hours and not eat. And being pregnant with my first child, I know that it's quite hard to sit for 3 hours and not eat. And I just wondered, it seems to me that that's a really off-putting thing to say to a young pregnant woman, pregnant with her first child in Parliament, and what changes are possible to make Parliament accessible for women?
Great. Okay, let's start with that one, working backwards then. I mean, you know, a sort of good, strong F-off probably should do it, but does that actually change?
It was a woman who said it to Tulip. It was a woman who had been pregnant in the house and had never had, and I think that there is a definite difference between the idea of, I suppose, your Sarah Palins versus your Hillary Clintons, your Theresa Mays versus your Harriet Harmans, is that Tory women in the UK, they are much more willing to appease their male colleagues and to try and fit into a world. So when Tulip was being told that, she was being told it like, I was pregnant and I didn't want to let womankind down by asking for special treatment, whereas people like me say, you should give me special
If there are Tory women here, you can disagree with that if you want.
Well, Tory women will do this thing where they go, well, it's not so much that I'm a feminist, I'm more of an equalist. Because it's constantly trying to appease something. And difficult women are much harder to elect and much, much harder, which Hillary Clinton found out to her, to everybody's sorrow. But the thing that needs to change in Parliament is there's a number of things. We should work better hours. The hours are ridiculous, especially for people with families. Why don't we start work until 11 o'clock and then work until 8 at night on just a basic day, and that's if nothing exceptional happens, and obviously exceptional things happen every single day. And we're often there till midnight for no reason whatsoever, and you're going to miss your child's parents' evening because you're being demanded to stay there to lose a vote.
And one of the things that people don't see is how incredibly male Parliament is behind the scenes. So you see the scenes in the House of Commons and you can see how few women there are compared to men, but all the back rooms are full of men. We ran this campaign to map sexual harassment and assaults in the UK, and people wrote a postcode on their hand and took a picture of their hand, and it was extraordinary how many people had the postcode for the Palace of Westminster on there. And yet, to me, who worked in there as a journalist, it wasn't extraordinary at all, because it is actually endemic in that place, and it is part of that culture.
Right, let's go and I think I might put this one in your hands, David. As a male feminist, presumably you call yourself a male feminist, you don't have a problem with that. What message would you send out to
well, I understand that it's really brilliant that there is a feminist club at your boys'
Yeah,
it's absolutely fantastic. But I understand your point that it might sometimes feel difficult to identify for young men or any man as that because there are a lot of twats around who will make fun of you for that. You know, it's exactly the sort of thing Piers Morgan will tweet annoyingly and unfunnily about if you call yourself a male feminist. I mean, it's partly just it's a slightly weird phrase. I mean, interested enough for that point about Tory women, I think it's probably right, actually, as far as Theresa May, whatever goes, but I think one reason why I'm a feminist, actually, is that as I've grown older, most political models, i.e. being left-wing or right-wing, whatever, they just don't fit for me anymore. I can no longer impose a political model on life. I can no longer say, I am left-wing, so therefore I think this about this subject and whatever. And about the only thing that across the board, I think, well, this is clearly, there are inequities here, it is wrong that this exists, that it should be changed, is gender. I mean, it just seems obvious to me that gender inequality exists, that there is, as I said earlier, a whole raft of ways in which people have bought into, without realizing it, power. So I'll give you a very quick example, going back to American politics briefly. There was a brief moment when Hillary Clinton was choosing who was going to be her vice president, her running mate, where it was floated that that might be a woman. And that was considered to be utterly ridiculous, right? The idea that you could have the same gender as both president and vice president, well, that would be ridiculous, obviously, if they were both women. And honestly, she would have no chance. I mean, literally, she would have had no chance. And that is so ridiculous and so, as you said, endemic, that there is something wrong with the way that we consider power and how we ascribe power, that I just think, well, as someone who believes that I have some ability to have insight into the world, I have to be a feminist.
Well, and the fight for gender equality the fight for gender equality does not belong just to one part of the political spectrum. Yeah. One of the problems with the left sometimes has been that in an attempt to solve all inequalities, women just get sent to the back of the queue. Which is, you know, we were talking about that problem of virtue on the left, of assuming that because people say the right things, or even think the right things, that they'll do the right things. Yeah. Not true, but that's the other thing, is this notion that you can solve inequality, you know, you have to
But also I think that virtuous thing with the left shades into machismo. I think that there's because they all think of themselves, even when they're old, as like rebellious and kind of charged with testosterone and fighting the good fight and all that stuff. I think then it's macho and it's very over male, I think.
We're running out of time, but I'm going to let June finish us off by talking to the young woman who described herself as a privileged white feminist who wants to pass the mic. What would you say?
Pass the mic.
Yeah.
No, I think we make it a lot harder. We make it a lot harder for ourselves. Like, what can I actually do? You know, look for women who are, you know, are facing all these, you know, having, you know, visible or invisible barriers in their life, and literally be like, how can I help you? I think we don't have to have grand acts of feminism. A lot of the time, you know, I spend a lot of today talking directly to schoolgirls and saying, oh, I've done this and I've done that. And one of them actually said to me, she said, oh, but, you know, that's a lot. Like, how have you managed to do it? And I said, look, I didn't start campaigning today. It's been 5 years. And I know I'm 18, but I've been doing this since I was, properly since I was 13. And it's gradual and it's little things. I started off in my school talking about these issues to my friends. And then, you know, 2-3 years down, I was at the UN, but I didn't wake up at the UN. It didn't work, didn't work like that. But I think it's literally that. Go out into your local communities and find these support groups. Go out, give your time, volunteer. If you have money, give money to groups. Look at groups that typically don't have access to these things. There's a really great site in the US called Togetherness, because often we, you know, might give money to Planned Parenthood, might give money to really huge organizations, but there are small organizations working directly with queer women, with disabled women, with black women, that you can give your money, your time, your resources to. And I think that lovely girl you're saying about how we can make people more aware about intersectionality, and that is to force it into discussion. One of the things that I did when I came on this stage, and one of the first things I said is, I'm the only black woman here. It's a fact. And that might make you uncomfortable, but I'm not interested. I'm stating a fact. And I think it's you have to make these things that feel uncomfortable to us to become the norm. And I always say 100 years ago, what we considered to be a terrorist was a woman demanding the vote. And now the idea that women in Britain don't have the vote would blow all of our minds. So again, it's, you know, you have the power to make what is abnormal the norm. So use that power, whether it's in your workplace, at home, within your families, to force that change. And if we collectively do that, then we'll be able to galvanize and have kind of incremental change around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. We're going to draw it to a close there. We've all got the kids to put to bed. Joke, well, sort of, you know. But thank you to this amazing panel and to all of you for coming. And do come to our next ones. Thank you all very much indeed.